Robert Fisk, welcome to Tunisia.
Thank you very much.
So, how do you evaluate the performance of Arab media since the beginning of the Tunisian revolution?
Well, I've been watching it not just here, I've been watching it in Egypt, of course, Bahrain, where it's pretty limited. And especially in Syria, of course, where all kinds of cracks are appearing in the media. Look, I think that in Egypt there was a particular moment. I mean, for obvious reasons, Egypt's revolution was on a much bigger scale than yours. I mean, in terms of people. Of course, I was in, say, Alexandria, particularly in Tunisia, in Egypt. And the day after Mubarak went, it was like a tide had washed out on the beach, leaving real newspapers on the newsstand for the first time, you know, because my theory always is that what the dictator does in order to maintain his power, the first thing he does when he arrives, he seals himself off in a sea of silence. And then he infantilizes his people, and he gives them fake governments, fake ministers, fake elections, fake newspapers. What happened in Egypt and what happened here is that for a series of reasons, not just, you know, Facebook, so the people suddenly grew up and realized that the government were made up of children. In the case of Egypt, one of them was 83 years old. Yeah. And you had a pretty old guy here. And I think that what happens at the same time is that the journalists suddenly realize, God, this is real, we can write about this. And the photographs were most powerful. The design, the layout, you could see people, they never left the office, they were laughing all night. 2 or 3 days later, there was a sort of mea culpa thing. What do we do about the terrible journalism we've been churning out for 40 years? They asked their readers, you know. And of course, thankfully in Egypt, despite the attempt of the army to repress Tanzania, to repress the press, it's remained pretty irrepressible on TV, for example, which I go on regularly in Egypt. They still ask tough questions. I mean, I was asked the other day, and this was Egyptian television for Egyptians, this wasn't English languages. What about Tantawi? I said, well, listen, first of all, he's got to get rid of that stupid baseball cap and put on a proper soldier's beret, like the other soldiers do. 1 week later, he did, but I'm sure there was no... Well, we don't know. And I said, the other thing he's got to do is every time he gets out of bed in the morning, he's got to say, I was not elected, I was not elected, I was not elected. Now, however much the army is trying to stay under the power, you can get away with that without the power. But let me give you an interesting situation in Syria. I was there just before Christmas, and I wasn't followed. I could go where I wanted in the Damascus area. And then Syrian TV, I went to the funeral of a Syrian soldier. Then Damascus Syrian television, state television, said, we want to do an interview with you. Wow. So much against my better judgment, I said, yes, all right, but if you cut anything, I'm going to put a big story in my paper telling people what you cut and why you cut it. Anyway, I did the interview, during which I said, you cannot any longer infantilize the people. It's finished. I said, President Assad is running out of time fast. He's not mad like Gaddafi, which the presenter said, oh, I agree with that. I said, but he's running out of time and it's going much faster than he realizes. Anyway, I went back to Beirut, turned on my television on Saturday evening, and they ran the whole thing in English with subtitles, good subtitles, and they kept in all the references to you can't infantilize people. So now, somewhere in the darkness of the Ba'ath Party, they realized that it might be a good idea to let a little light in here. Because Assad knows he's running out of time. But the official line is he's not running out of time at all, you see. So it had all kinds of strange effects. In Egypt, it was like bathing in gold. In Syria, it's like cracks. I was reading your press for about a week after the revolution was over, about 3 or 4 weeks later. And I thought that the articles in French language press I was reading mostly, I thought they were very long, very philosophical, and rather uninteresting. There's nothing for a journalist more boring than a boring revolution. Not the revolution itself, but the aftermath. And it seemed to me that, as in Egypt, critical issues were not yet being addressed. I'll give an Egyptian example. People in Tahrir Square, before Mubarak, all we want is Mubarak to go. Yellow Mubarak, that's it, you see? And I kept saying, but hold on a second, what about Tantawi? What about the government? What about his ministers? What about elections? Just let Mubarak go. And they began to talk about elections before Mubarak went. And I remember, during the Tahrir Square demonstrations, opening one of the Egyptian papers, they were getting freer, you see? And seeing the Muslim Brotherhood, these rather plump gentlemen, sitting down with Tantawi. This is before the SCAF, the Supreme Council. I remember thinking, I didn't see these people in Tahrir Square. They were already. Immediately after the revolution, Tantawi sent one of his generals to America to lecture to, the Brookings Institute, the Council of Foreign Relations, and these others, think tanks, idiotic people who, in many cases, have never been to the Middle East. And telling them the Muslim Brotherhood wasn't that bad, we can deal with them. Setting up the new regime. And the press were quite slow, I thought. I mean, I was asking questions in the Independent before the Egyptian press were. I'm not being nice to Robert when I say that. That was the fact. And saying to people, a group of Tahrir people found me at the Marriott Hotel in the Nile having coffee one afternoon. It was coffee, and all very chill. We're going to get rid of Robert. I said, listen, you're not doing it. Think. It needs to go further than that. Because if Mubarak goes, you're going to start another revolution against the next guy. You've got to have it. Here I found that the press became such that the issue of the Constitution, the Assembly election, and then the vast number of articles about another, which didn't. The thing is, the West always says it's an Islamist party. This is rubbish that the West lays down. We should be talking more about economy. What's the party going to do with economy? I remember once talking to a friend of the FIS in Algeria that won the first round of elections, but not won the second round. He just called the Secretary General of the party. I was in Khartoum, which will give you an indication of who I was with. And he said to me, I was amazed. I got through Algeria. I said, what is going to be your foreign policy? And the guy said, why do we need a foreign policy? He said, but you're going to be elected. Now, the press here concentrated not so much on the will it become an Islamic state, because I think you knew it wasn't going to be, but it was very locked into the philosophical side of the various political parties. And I wanted to know, what are you going to do for your country? Not, how has your philosophy developed in the dark years of Ben Ali, and indeed Habib Bourguiba for that matter. So, one of the sort of things I keep saying over and over again in my reports is Egypt was not Tunisia, Yemen was not Egypt, Libya was not Yemen, and Syria is not Libya. And the press has developed in different ways in different places. One of the most extraordinary things about the revolution, I call it the Arab Awakening, after George Antonius' book on the Arab Revolt, and which was really wanting. I mean, what the British promised after secretly agreeing to this was one national Arab entity, one Arab nation. And yet, interestingly, now you've had the second awakening, perhaps the real awakening, everyone is keeping in their colonial borders. No Tunisians arrived in Egypt to fight in Tahrir Square. No Egyptians have gone to Syria. I mean, they tweet and they Twitter and they talk to where else, but they don't go there. I haven't seen anyone in Bahrain who came from here. A few Bahrainis have gone to Egypt. But I mean, in terms of saying, to hell with the colonial barriers, we are one Arab national people against dictatorship, not there. True, they were not interested in Bin Laden or Al-Qaeda. I didn't see anywhere, in all the various revolutions, I didn't see a single picture of Bin Laden, a single post from Al-Qaeda. That's true. But they kept the colonial boundaries. The border between Jordan and Syria, between Lebanon and Syria, Lebanon being sympathetic, quote unquote, to Syria is as sealed off. Well, it's not sealed very much, but it's still there and as rigorously kept as before, which is very interesting because you would have thought, going back to the period of say Saad Zaghloul, who was another Arab Spring, that you would have seen people pulling down frontier barriers. For example, maybe pulling down the barrier between Tunisia and Libya for the brave Libyan people. No, the barrier stayed. The flags changed on each on this side, that side.
After more than 3 decades in the Middle East, are things really changing?
Yes.
Or is it just the surface?
No, they're changing. I remember talking to my foreign editor in February, after Tunisia, still during Egypt. And I wasn't teaching him, he's a very bright guy. I just said to him, you've got to realise that whether you call this the spring or the awakening, it's not going to fit into newspaper deadlines. It's not going to be over by Christmas. I think that the awakening is going to take a long time. It's going to end with Saudi Arabia. Put your fingers in your ears when that happens. And it's going to go on long after you and I have died in old age. This is not a sudden... I mean, the countries will stabilise, unstabilise, move, change philosophy. They won't have unity. There won't be ittihad, but there'll be all kinds of alliances. It all happens at That's a different question. We'll leave Syria out of this for the moment. And the other thing you need to realise, it was going on for a long time. I think the Arab awakening began in Beirut in 2005, in the million people who gathered in Martyrs Square, Beirut, after the assassination on February 14th, yesterday, 7 years ago, of former Prime Minister Rafik Hariri, and demanded the Syrians to leave, and the Syrians left. That was the first Arab revolt of this awakening.
What do you think?
The second one was a Muslim one. And that was the reaction to the Adnen Chaouachi election in 2009. I was on the streets of Tehran. And as soon as people heard that I come from Beirut, how much did they use the emails as much as us? Did they use the Facebook? They were locked. They had always watched Beirut on television. Not on their own television, of course, it was on the Syrian side, but on TV. So there was a clear message that went from Beirut to Tehran, to Tunisia, to Egypt. Probably it went to Egypt as well, it just happened to start here. I'm not one of those journalists who romanticise and say it all started with boys in here, excuse me. It did not. In Egypt, for example, I discovered and went to Mahala, it's a cotton town, 140 kilometres north of Cairo. It's almost in the age of steam, horse-drawn wagons to go. Anyway, big cotton factory, it's very important for the Egyptian economy. In 2006, they went into the centre of Mahala, Tahrir Square, demanded down for Mubarak and more wages, called people in from the countryside using mobile phones. They had a little Arab awakening in Mahala in 2006, which was 1 year after Beirut 2005.
But no one reported these events.
No, I didn't even know about it. When I heard about it after Tahrir, I went to Mahala. And met the people who were behind it. And it turned out that in the last days of Tahrir in 2011, they poured in from Mahala and joined in at the square. So the Mahala Revolution 2006 became the Egyptian Revolution 2011. One other interesting point, which very much concerns Tunisia, is that I've discovered going around to each country, including Syria, that where you have strong trade union movements, you avoid the bloodbath, like Syria. Egypt, strong trade unions, especially in the industrial cities, Souk, Mahala, the Nile Delta. Here you have very strong trade unions, despite the reputation of Libya, you had none. Yemen, they meant nothing. In Syria, they were run by the Ba'ath Party. So where you had strong trade union movements, the level of violence and blood was much less.
Where's the link between trade unions and the level of violence?
Because trade unions had a political program before revolution was due.
Do you think they still have the political program after the revolution?
I don't know. I'm merely pointing out that where you had strong trade unions, you had less bloodshed. I mean, I've gone to each place and watched and talked to trade unions in Egypt, and it is a fact, whether you like it or not, and whatever the explanation is, I think it's because they understood political programs. And they understood the limits of what revolutions could do.
What do you mean by the limits of what?
Well, I don't think you could preach trade unionism to the people of Homs anymore.
Yeah, it's too late. So, how do you describe the situation in Syria?
Well, look, I tried to write 2 pieces in the past week. Well, I did write in my paper, trying to tell people, look, hold on a second. The Syrian Ba'ath Party, the Ummah al-Wahid of Syria, is a very unique creature. Forget the Assad family. The Ba'athist ideology means Arab nationalism in its purest form. And remember, we've had revolutions before like this in Syria. The 20s against the French. 46, they fought the French until the French bombarded the Parliament building. It burned down and killed the MPs inside. We had Hammer in 82. Especially on the Hammer-Homs block. But the Ba'ath Party has such deep roots Look at Lebanon, they were there for more than 25 years, and after they'd left, more people got assassinated, and you can see how deep the claws, the glyph, were in the ground. Now, if they could hang on deep in the soil of Lebanon for more than 25 years, this is Syria, much longer. This is a tough party. And if you think they won't go to further lengths, who killed Maria?
Should never forget.
I think that Assad may hang on a lot longer than people think. And you know, La Clinton, as I call her, may huff and puff. And Qatar may jump up and down. But if you sit in the presidential palace in Damascus, I'm not advising you to, but if you do, and you look east, you see Iran, faithful ally, Iraq, Shiite majority, yourself and Lebanon, okay, it's Alawi's minority, but you run the country. So there's an alliance from the Afghan border to the Mediterranean. He's not that worried yet. If the revolution comes to Aleppo and Damascus, that's the end. Remember, Najibullah could only fly from Kandahar to Kabul, but he hung on for 3 years.
Yeah, that's true.
Let's go and hang on.
It's obvious that Bashar al-Assad is not willing to step down.
No, I think you've misunderstood. To repeat, Bashar is not going down. I think he realises he's going to die. But what he wants to do, or what he wanted to do, was be the man who went down in Syrian history to change the course of history of Syria. But ultimately, you see, you can't do that because if you try to do it, other members of the Ba'ath or the family will displace you, and you will be given a villa to go and live in Turkey or up in the mountains of Lataya. But I think he genuinely, at the very beginning, thought he could do that. And in the end, I came to the conclusion in Damascus when I was there, he'll just soldier around for the best, and that doesn't work.
Do you think he's trying to change the history of Syria or the region?
He wants to go down in Syrian history as the man who changed it for the better. But you see, he had a chance after Hafez died, he failed. The power of the party was too strong.
Do you think it's still possible?
Well, at the moment, if he does try, there will be another correctional movement like there was when Hafez took over, won't there? I think, I fear.
Correctional movements after thousands of deaths?
Hafez al-Assad had a huge funeral 18 years after Hama. 10,000 dead? 15,000 dead?
Does this mean that people might forget?
No, not anymore. Syrian history will never go back. I mean, I was talking to Hezbollah people who were in hours, and they said it's going to change. I don't see it Assad would go, but it's going to change. We all know. Everybody knows. Bashar al-Assad knows it's going to change. He's not sitting there hoping he can go back to the easy days. I mean, he might, if they came back, he might like it, but he doesn't think he will. I don't think so.
Maybe in the past people used to forget because there were no traces, but today there's the internet and Facebook and YouTube.
Look, I'm bound to say this, but I think the internet and Facebook and YouTube are overdone. You know, when Nasser took over Egypt, there was a huge revolution against the army, just as it was against Tantara. And people were using Romeo scripts, they were using typewriters and sending things on faxes, early faxes. I mean, there's always been a system of, I mean, even in the Warsaw Ghetto, they had a daily newspaper. I mean, not the Warsaw Ghetto, the Warsaw Uprising. Yeah. As Nazi bombs were eliminating the city, they were still churning out newspapers. There's always a technology which will happen. Lawrence of Arabia said, if you have a printing press, you'll win the war. You know, don't get too carried away with Twitters and Twitters and blog box. You know?
So, how do you imagine the future of Syria? Which scenarios do you foresee?
At the moment, it's all going on. I mean, I was up in Tripoli, 3 days ago. Bullets skittering off the walls of the Alawi apartment blocks as the Sunnis open fire, rockets whizzing backwards and forwards. The Sunnis holding up a huge poster of Assad as a pig. Yeah. And 10% of the people of Tripoli have relatives in house. This is not, because before the French mandate, it was one country, it was what, 40 miles away. Went shopping in Tripoli and went back home to Homs. Yeah. People forget this, they think they're separate countries.
So in a recent article entitled Homs bloodshed spillover into Lebanon, you have mentioned that tension was rising at the Syrian border. Do you think the crisis will have an impact on Lebanon?
Well, we all hope not. Since I live there, I'll join myself with a we. Clearly it was going to in Tripoli. I went up to Tripoli 8 months ago and did an article saying there'll be trouble here. You know, there was. The Lebanese army, curious enough, are inside the Crusader castle of Sanjil. You know, they're actually at the arrow slits where the Crusaders stood to keep the Alawis at Jebel Mosul away from Babel to here, which is where the Sunnis are. So there was bound to be trouble there. There is great anger building up in Sinai, which is a Sunni city, very conservative Sunni city. A place like Tripoli and Sidon, there's no alcohol for Sinai. It's quite changed, unlike Beirut. That's not a sign of conservatism, but it shows you the degree to which Sunnism has taken a religious slant. And of course you have this vast Shiite population, the largest community in Lebanon, though not the majority. And the president, justifying why Lebanon will not declare on behalf of the opponents of the regime, says our interests have to come first, we must remain stable. But it's a huge worry, of course it is. I mean, outside my home on the Corniche in Beirut, there are army convoys going up and down and watching all the time, soldiers with rifles pointing out and that. Most people like the Lebanese army, although I have to point out that 60% of them are Shiite. That's why the army cannot disarm Hezbollah, because they don't want to take weapons off their brothers and kill them.
I'd like to talk about the media coverage of the revolutions in the Arab world.
Even Western media coverage.
Yeah, sure.
Pretty
Western. And I also like to talk about the Arab media coverage of the revolutions as well. So we have the Eastern and the Western. So do you think the Arab media sided with the people, or
look,
they had an agenda and they had political goals?
At the beginning, the Egyptian media went on as usual with the Mubarak. They were so used to it, they could do it with their eyes closed without looking at it. And not probably quite the right person to ask this question, because you see, I was on the streets trying to get through checkpoints. I wasn't reading the papers at the time. I was watching Arab TV. I was watching Al Jazeera Arabic, which was disgraceful, refusing to cover the Bahraini revolution, for all the reasons we know. I mean, Qatar came to Bahrain. The Egyptians came to believe that Al Jazeera, the Mubarak acts, came to believe that Al Jazeera got rid of Mubarak benefits. I think the role of television is has always been infinitely overestimated, as emails and so on. I'm a great paper person, but even the influence of newspapers. People had lost their fear, as they have now in Syria. And if you lose your fear, you cannot be re-injected with fear. You don't need Al Jazeera to tell you the police beat up your brother or shotgunned your father. You know it. And once that anger loses fear, there's nothing the dictator can do. You cannot be re-injected. And that is the key to the revolution, losing your fear.
So it's not necessarily the influence of the media.
There was an influence, but I think when you talk about the influence of the media, you're detracting from the courage of the people.
What is your advice to the new generation of journalists?
I have absolutely no advice to new generations of journalists. I do always say to them, look, here is how I see the journalism I've tried to do.
How do you see it? How do you see it?
My journalism?
Yes.
I think we should be impartial on the side of those who suffer, that our duty, to quote Amir Haas, the great Israeli journalist, is to monitor the centres of power, surveiller les centres du pouvoir, and our job is not to use the kind of impartiality that we use in covering a football match or a public inquiry into new autostrada, because the Middle East is not a football match, it is a bloodbath.
Robert Fisk, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Excellent.
Well done. Was that good?